Hey everybody, my name is Deja. Today I'm going to be discussing my favorite books of 2021. So I have 7 honorable mentions. 6 honorable mentions honestly can be in any order. I loved all of them. So for my top 10, I tried to rank it, but honestly, I don't even know. I just know that my top 2 are for sure my top 2. Like that's 1 and 2. And then my 3rd through 5th, they could probably go in any order depending on the day. And then the last 5 of the top 10 could be in any order, and I'd be like, yeah, that's fine, makes sense. I loved all these books so much, but I'm going to start with the honorable mentions and then work my way down to my favorite book of the year. So the first honorable mention that I have is Good Girl Bad Blood by Holly Jackson. This is the second book to A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, and I loved this book so much. The first time that I read this was actually like March, I think it was for Bookopoly-thon, which I thought was in July, but I read this around in like March, I believe. And then I remember really loving it, and I remember loving the twists. But I was reading this during a live show where all my friends were hitting milestones, people were subscribing, and it was crazy. I just knew that I had to reread it. So I reread this in December, and it solidified itself. If you don't know what this series is about, which would be surprising if you've been on my channel since last year, because I swear A Good Girl's Guide to Murder was my brand book last year. But basically in that book we follow our main character Pip, and Pip has to do a final project. So she decides to investigate a disappearance that happened in her town, and this girl disappeared, and her boyfriend, who was later found dead, was just thought to have been the one that made her disappear. And we don't really know where she went, but Pip does not actually believe that it was the boyfriend, and she wants to figure out what actually happened to this girl. She not only does it for a project, but she starts a podcast where she talks about her investigation, and that is what continues in this book, where we see her podcast again and she's delving into a different mystery. This series is also in mixed media, so there's like text messages, voice notes, there's like a whole bunch of like files and stuff, and I highly recommend the audiobooks for these. Like I think the audiobooks are phenomenal, and I think if you had to choose to either read it physically or on audio, I would say audio. I think it just makes the experience way better, but if you could physically read it or read the ebook while listening to the audio, that's prime reading. And I honestly just love Pip so much, and I feel like I even relate to her way more in this book than the first book. I feel like we are way more similar because she's gone through so much trauma in the first book. She came out different, and I love that. And she has a little romance that is throughout the series, and I love that character too. I don't want to spoil it, but I love it. And again, I just love the mixed media. She's an amateur sleuth, but she does it in the best way, and I just love the series so much. It has such a special place in my heart. I couldn't not put it on this list. The next book that I have is The Takeover by T.L. Swan. This is the second book in the Miles High Club. I've not actually read the first one because this is a romance series where you can read all the books out of order, and I read this for my book club this year, Swoon Sisters, and I absolutely adored this book. The banter in this book was top tier, like you don't understand. In this book we follow our main character Claire, and she is a widow. She has 3 sons of varying ages, and her husband did die, and he left her this company, and the company is kind of going under. So this man, Tristan, wants to buy it, and he works for a bigger company, and she does not like Tristan at all because he's trying to buy the last thing that her husband left to her, and it's their romance. And so it's definitely like enemies to lovers. Well, Claire hates Tristan. Tristan does not hate Claire, but he definitely teases her a lot. And again, the banter in here is literally top tier. Like that's what sent this over, is just the way that he like kind of like got under her skin, but she hated it at first, but then she got used to it. They just loved each other so much in the end, and not only do you see the love grow between Tristan and Claire, but you also saw it grow between Tristan and her sons, because the sons, specifically some of them, did not like Tristan at all, but one of them has to actually work with Tristan, and they end up loving him so much in the end and do a lot of things for him, and he loves them as well. It warmed my heart. The next book I'm going to talk about is House of Hollow by Krystal Sutherland. This was read for another one of my book club, Stacks of Strange, this year, and I did not expect to love this book as much as I did because it is young adult, and most of the books that I have on this list are not young adult. I've been more into like new adult and adult, but I adored this book so much. It does kind of go into like this speculative fiction, kind of diverges from like the real world, which normally does not work for me in like thrillers and horror, and this one is kind of like a a mystery horror, and I still loved it. Like, I thought it was done amazing, and this book is almost like heartbreaking, but I loved it so much. So in this book, we follow our main character Iris, and Iris and her sisters, when they were younger, they one day disappeared off the street, and they came back like a week later, something like that, completely different. Their hair is a different color, they're just look different, and they're themselves, but they look different, and they honestly don't know what happened when they disappeared. Now Iris is 17, she's the youngest of the three sisters, and her older sister Gray disappears one day, and Gray's actually like famous. She's a celebrity, so it's kind of a big deal that she disappears, and it's very noticeable because she's active on social media. I don't know if she's a celebrity or like an influencer, kind of somewhere in there, and it's very noticeable that she's not on social media. So she teams up with her other older sister, which is the middle sister, to find out where Gray went. And so we have that mystery, but I loved this book. The writing had me. Like, it was just so lyrical, and I know some people are going to think it's repetitive, but it just worked for me, and I loved it so much, and I adored it. And it had a lot to do with like plants and nature, and I think that's why I specifically love the writing in this so much, because I love plants, I love nature, and I think having that in writing, especially when it was used in like a horror setting, was just amazing. There was a little bit of part of it throughout the book that I can think of that kind of lagged a little bit for me, and I wish it wasn't in there originally, and that's kind of what bumped it down from being a 5-star to a 4.5 star. But the more that I sit on it, the more that I love this book, and I just had to include it as an honorable mention. The next book that I have is Obsidio by Aimee Kaufman and J. Kristoff. I absolutely adore the Illuminate File series so much. It's one of my favorite series of all time, and this is definitely not my favorite book in the series. It's probably my least favorite of the three, but I just felt like it rounded out the series so well, I had to include it on this list. I have such a love for this book because I loved seeing all the characters from the other two books in this book. In the first book, we follow two characters who were in a relationship and they just broke up, but then now their planet is being taken over, or not taken over, I should say, like a company's coming in to slaughter the people on this planet, and some of them get away, including the two main characters. They get away onto ships, and the company is still coming after them to kill the remaining survivors of who are on the planet, and we don't really know why they're doing this, and that's kind of what this whole series explores, as well as obviously stopping them. But this series, it just goes to like cosmic levels. Each book in the trilogy follows different characters and like different relationships, but this one, all of them obviously come together and work together, and it's like the finale of everything. So I just loved it. I think they did such a great job wrapping this series up, and this one is also mixed media, and that's like one of the reasons I love this series so much. And it's honestly, the series is hilarious, like laughing out loud funny, and I just loved this book because it just wrapped up one of my favorite series. The next honorable mention that I have is Flow by Kennedy Ryan, and this is actually a novella prequel to the Grip series, and you do have to read this one before you read the rest of the Grip series. It's technically like a duology, I guess, but really a trilogy because you have to read the prequel. There's a lot of discussions in here about race and the music industry, and I just absolutely adored the writing. Like, I can tell Kennedy Ryan's gonna be one of my favorite authors, even though I've only read this novella. It was that good. It was just phenomenal, and honestly, like chef's kiss. I can't talk about it too much because it's literally a novella, but in this, we follow two characters, Bristol and Grip, and Bristol is going to visit her brother who works in the music industry in Los Angeles, and they haven't seen each other for a really long time, and he's actually busy, so he sends his friend Grip to pick her up, and they kind of start to get to know each other and hang out for a little bit, and then their real love story is like a second chance romance that starts in the second book / the first full book. And as I said, I just love the two characters. I love Kennedy Ryan's writing, and it was just phenomenal. So the next honorable mention is Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. I have a copy of this. I just don't know where it went, but I loved Grown so much. It was amazing. I recently read this. This book talks about abuse. It's about our main character, and she is a younger teenager, probably like 15-ish, 16 maybe, and she sings, and she kind of wants to be famous for it. And this like record label manager person convinces her parents to let her like come on tour with him and kind of basically make music for him, and he is abusive, and he's an awful, disgusting human being. This book like almost got me sick to my stomach. Not quite Not quite, but almost there, because just seeing this really young girl get manipulated and gaslit and literally like abused and tortured, and seeing her justify her relationship with this way older man was disgusting. This book connected with me on a personal level, which is probably why I love this book so much, even though it is like young adult, but I just connected with it a lot. I think this book is amazing for younger adult audiences because of how blatant it is in its themes, but I think that's really necessary. And this also goes into the topic of how black girls are not believed. If it was a white girl, they would probably be believed, but because she's a black girl, she's not believed. And that was a really important topic that needed to be discussed, and I'm so glad I touched on that. That's what really pushed me to love this book so much, is that it dove into that, and this book is just so important. Everybody needs to read it. And then the last honorable mention that I have is They Never Learn by Layne Fargo, which is a revenge feminist thriller, which is honestly every single buzzword that I could ever have in a book. There is 2 timelines in this book, and the main timeline is our main character, Scarlett Clark, and she is a professor at this college campus, and she decides to be a serial killer, basically. I don't know if she really decides it, but she's a serial killer who kills men that do awful things, like rape girls or just do awful things. She kills them in revenge for what they did. And in the second timeline, we follow our character Carly, who is a past student at the university, and she is just trying to survive being in college for the first time, and she escaped her abusive father, and she starts falling in love with her roommates, and we follow those 2 storylines. And I love this because I love to see women just getting their revenge, because who doesn't hate men?
I said what I said, and always. I'm not changing on it, okay?
My guy friends hate when I say that. But I don't hate all men, but you know what I'm trying to say. Like, men as a whole, not a great group.
You know, I know you know. I know you know.
And so I love seeing Scarlett really just take down the ones that are the worst of the worst. And I loved it so much. I loved Carly's storyline because we saw her falling in love with her roommate, and I loved it so much because, you know, it's sapphic. Because I went to college right after I read this, it really just resonated with me, and the plot twist in this book honestly had me shook, and this was just a really, really great book. So now getting into my top 10, the first book that I have is A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. I'm gonna say for all these books, I adored this book. I recently read this on the recommendation of Jan Agaton, who's one of my friends, and I love this book. It's so good. When I first read this, I knew that I really, really liked it, but I could tell that it was going to grow on me over time, and it's starting to even grow bigger, and so I definitely feel comfortable putting it in my top 10 because the writing in this is absolutely beautiful. It's so lyrical and stunning, and it's such a short story, and I wish there was honestly more of it. That's like my only complaint, but this is a lyrical and dreamy reimagining of Dracula's brides, and it's a story of desire, obsession, and emancipation. So that gives it away basically, but we follow a bride of Dracula, and she is writing a letter to Dracula basically, but she never names him. And this book is so subtle in the ways that it talks about abuse, and it is just so fantastic. I highly recommend this book. It definitely has triggers, but I loved how it talked about the subtleties of abuse, and that's what I really loved in the writing. And I loved the vampire aspects. I feel like they went along so well. I just love vampires, honestly, and I love the bloodiness of this, and seeing the dynamics of the relationship change and how the abuse changes over time as new people are introduced to the relationship, and just how things change over time, because this takes place over centuries, and it's just so good, so good. So the book in my 9th spot is The Echo Wife by Sarah Gailey, and I read this for Stacks of Strange as well. This book is really, really good for some people. This is like controversial. A lot of people do not like this book because they found it boring, that it had no point, but that's kind of like what I loved about it, honestly. I do think I just really like character studies. That's kind of what A Dowry of Blood is as well. It doesn't have a ton of plot, but it's kind of a character study, and that's what The Echo Wife is, and I absolutely adore that about it. It's so phenomenal. Like, it is just so good. It follows a woman named Evelyn, and she did research and basically kind of created clones, and she did that with the help of her husband, and then her husband ends up making a clone of her, and stuff happens, and in the synopsis, it kind of gives away more than that. People talk about more of the plot than just that, but I feel like that's kind of what you need to know. It is marketed as a thriller, but I would honestly call it a drama. I don't think it's really a thriller. It's like a sci-fi drama in my head because of the clones. It's not too heavy on the sci-fi, but I just really loved this book. Evelyn is not a likable character at all, but I loved seeing her even though she wasn't likable, and I love seeing her grow to be a better person, and her being with this clone that she doesn't like because her husband created this clone to cheat on her with, he married the clone. Like literally, like she got replaced with this clone, but then she has to end up working with the clone, and she doesn't like the clone, but she kind of has to do it anyways. And I love seeing her grow to understand the clone and really understand that it's not the clone's fault. It was her husband. Maybe I just really like seeing how men are bad because they never learn. Dowry of Blood, this book all kind of discuss how men are not great. But I adored this book so much, and this really kind of solidified for me. I think that I really like sci-fi and thrillers / like drama mysteries where it's there. It's not just sci-fi. So the book in my 8th spot is Punk 57 by Penelope Douglas. I really like this book, and I thought it was probably going to be higher on my list, honestly. I read it twice this year, and I really did like this book. This book has gotten me into really reading new adult now and knowing that I love bully romances. This was the start of it. So it has to have a place on this list. And I cannot. In this book, we follow Misha and Ryan, and Misha and Ryan are pen pals from different schools, but they've never met each other. They don't really know each other's identity. They've keeping it a secret, and they promise that they wouldn't like look each other up or anything like that. And Misha has not written to Ryan in 3 months, which has never happened before, and she was wondering what's going on with him, and that's like a big plot line of this. But then Ryan also has a new guy that shows up at her school who doesn't treat her that well. He kind of embarrasses her, but she kind of likes it. And we figure out why Misha has not been writing back, what's up with this new guy, and there is a plot twist at the end of this book. There's like a little bit of like another mystery sprinkled in of why this new guy came to this school, and we're like, what is it? And you kind of forget about it as like the romance is developing, but then at the end it's revealed, and I was like when I tell you, I was shook. This relationship is like not healthy. It's toxic. It's not good, but that's what makes it so beautiful. Okay, I like mess. I love mess, and this book is mess. And I just think that the way that Penelope Douglas kind of wove the mysteries to make the mess is what made it so good. Like, I love mess, and I will enjoy mess for the sake of mess. I really will. But this mess was purposeful, and that's why I loved it. And again, this is like a bully romance, which is the start of my love for bully romances. The next book that I have on this list is Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Elson, which I just finished, and I did not expect to have a middle grade on this list, but I absolutely adored this book so much. I have not really read like any fantasy this year at all, except this one and like 2 others, and I loved this book. It was just so sweet, and this is only the second middle grade that I've read since I was at middle grade age, and I just fell in love with the story so much. This copy was also sent to me by Naomi from Naomi's library, so thank you so much, Naomi. In this book, Amari's brother disappears, and Amari does not know what's going on with him, but one day she gets invited to this magical academy and is told that her brother was a part of it, and she's going there to figure out where her brother went, but she's also discovering about magic and magical powers. And I loved this and how this subtly connected racism to the discrimination that's happening in here against these people called the magicians. And I loved that connection so much. I thought it was done beautifully, and I absolutely just loved the magic and whimsy of this book. It was so magical and whimsical. The friendships in here were crazy, and honestly, like low-key, we started shipping people with other people in this book, and I should not ship like middle school age children, but I definitely did. But the plot twist at the end of this had me shook and shaken. I did not expect what happened to have happened, and I felt lied to throughout this whole book. There were lies told, and I'm hurt, but I still loved it. So the book in my number 6 spot is Jar of Hearts by Jennifer Hillier. I should have known this was going to be one of my favorites, but in this book we follow our main character Geo, and so her and her best friend kind of get wrapped up into some bad stuff, and her best friend ends up disappearing. 14 years later, the remains of her best friend are found near Geo's home, and she's sent to prison. we follow Gio when she's in high school with her best friend. We follow her when she's in prison, and we follow her after she's gotten out of prison, because she was not convicted of the murder, just as being like a accomplice. And I loved how it had 3 different storylines, and the main storylines for sure are the one where she's in high school and the one now that she's out of prison, and they definitely converge together to tell you what happened to her best friend, like what truly happened. But I love how this brought in the discussion of prison. I loved seeing her in prison. But this also is another book that doesn't talk great about men, to be honest. Men are definitely the villain in this book, and I honestly cannot tell you what I loved about this book, because it's a thriller, and I just can't tell you. But the 2 storylines coming together is really what did it for me. It was really just so amazingly crafted that the 2 storylines came together seamlessly for a big grand finale, and it was just phenomenal ending. It was fantastic. Absolutely 10 out of 10 recommend. So now getting into my top 5, the first one that I have is Verity by Colleen Hoover. If you told me this would have been in my top 10 of the year, I wouldn't have laughed at you. But this book, oh, okay, it had me so intrigued. Would I say this book is quality literature? Absolutely not. This book I would not say is phenomenal. It's not fantastic. I would not say that, but it can be interested, entertained, intrigued the whole time, and the end had me on a different planet. I was literally, I astral projected, like I was not here, because it just sent me. It sent me because it was just so left field. It wasn't too left field that I was like, this is unbelievable. You know, some people definitely would think that the ending's unbelievable, but I absolutely adored it, and I ate this book up. Ate it, okay? You know, it was so good. In this book, we follow our main character, Layne, and in the beginning of this, we see Layne, and she is going to this meeting, and she sees this person get ran over by a car, and this man also witnesses it and helps her clean herself up. But they're both like, I got meetings to go to, let's go. So they both go to their separate meetings, but she ends up having a meeting with that man, and that man is actually the husband of a famous writer, Verity, and Verity is in a comatose state, and she cannot finish the rest of her series. So the publisher and her husband want to basically ask Layne to write the rest of Verity's series for like $500,000. And so she's obviously like,
$500,000 you said? All right, bet.
She moves into Verity's house to try and figure out, like, go through her stuff and figure out where she was going to take the series. And it was so good. Again, not good in the sense that it's quality literature. It was just, I just devoured it, okay? And there is a little bit of like romance and steam and twists and turns, and I should have seen everything coming, but I was just along for the ride. I wasn't even thinking about it. And the beginning where that man gets ran over just had me sucked in from page 1, because that was a lot, and I did not expect that to come from Miss Colleen. Anyways, if you want a fast, fun, messy ride, pick this up. So my number 4 spot, like number 3 and number 4 are really hard for me to pin down which one's 3 and 4, but I put this in my number 4 spot, and that is Dear Ava by Ilsa Madden Mills. I've also read this book twice this year, and this book, it just did things, okay? In this book, we follow Ava, obviously, and Ava was sexually assaulted by one of the, like, jocks at our high school. They're called the Sharks, which is very, like, new adult, like, it's very new adult Wattpad that they're called the Sharks, but that's what they're called. She was sexually assaulted by one of the Sharks, like, the summer before, and she took a while off school, like a semester, 2 semesters, and now she's back, and nobody likes her because they all think that she's lying, because she does not remember who it was. And she goes to this private school with the Sharks, but she's there on a scholarship while everybody else kind of pays their way in because they have money, and their families kind of run the town. So she really has no help from anybody, because everybody that she could get help from are literally parents of the people that she's accusing, and so she really does not get help. But one shark starts writing her letters and leaving them in her locker, and we kind of know who the shark is, but Ava doesn't know, and we also follow that shark, and we get his perspective. And I just love the romance in here so much. Like, I love seeing how they came together, and this dives into so many really, really important topics, like sexual assault, PTSD, death of a parent, addiction, being abandoned by your parents, trying to take care of a disabled person, Like, it just dives into so much, and I think it does it so well in like a new adult bully romance. Like, it did the important topics really well, but also the bully romance really well, which is why I adored it. And I literally made a TikTok about this, and I did like a not like a mood board, I forget what I called it, but it just has so many good moments, and at the end of this really had my heart, because it broke it and then it put it back together in such a perfect way. And I literally, like, thinking about this book makes me want to cry, because it just connected with me so well for some reason, and it really did like break my heart and put it back together. I just love the discussions that were had in this book, and I think it was just done so well. So good. So getting into my top 3, I have another new adult romance, and that is The Chase by Elle Kennedy, which I also read for my book club, Twin Sisters. And this book I just connected with so much. This is definitely more lighthearted, more fun than Dear Ava. But in this we follow our main character, Summer, and Summer is kind of like, she's giving like Elle Woods, you know? She's like in college, but she's kind of like a little Barbie, and she starts a fire at her old college, so she's sent to a new college that her brother used to go to, but she needs to find somewhere to live. So she starts rooming with these boys, and including her love interest, Colin Fitzgerald, they call him Fitz, and he is on the hockey team that her brother was on, because this is the first book in a spin-off series, but I haven't read the first series. She moves in with him, and he's a grump, she's a sunshine, so it's a very grumpy sunshine, but he has so many layers to him. And she, when I first read about Summer, I was like, I'm gonna hate her, like, I already hate her, like, but she has so many layers to her, and she's very feminist, which I love. She stands up for women in this book so much. You would think someone like an Elle Woods type character would like put other women down, but she literally lifts them up, and she does not take no BS, no disrespect from nobody. And she also has ADHD, and I feel like the ADHD rep was done in this book so well. I don't know if I would love this book as much as I did if it didn't have that in it, because the ADHD rep is honestly what resonated with me, and it was so relatable because I have ADHD. So seeing her go through the struggles of that in a higher level academic environment was just really beautiful. I honestly just love how Elle Kennedy was able to craft and Summer and Fitz to be two characters that at first glance look so basic. They look like literal like stereotypes, but underneath they have so many layers and so much to them that I had to have this really high on my list. So the book in my number 2 spot is Wolfsong by TJ Klune, and this is the second year TJ Klune has made it onto my top 10 of the year. And this book, when I tell you, I have never sobbed like I have in this book. I probably definitely have, but I honestly don't think another book has made me cry this year besides this one. And this one, it wasn't even like I had like a little bit of tears. I was sobbing, crying. I felt like my heart was shattered
into a million pieces. Like,
I was distraught. Like, I could not function because of this book. It really ripped my heart out. Like, I honestly don't know how else to describe it, but I felt the physical pain in my heart because this book just, it did that. And TJ Klune just has the way into my heart. He literally makes my heart do a lot of different things, whether he's putting it back together, making it give little butterflies, whether he's ripping it apart. He just does that. Okay, so in this book we follow our main character Ox, and Ox was kind of abandoned by his father when he was really young, and he just lives in this city. And when he's 16, a new family moves into town, and they kind of take him under their wings. He becomes a part of their family, but he does that really because he becomes friends with this little boy who's like probably like 8 or 9 at the beginning of the book. So they have like a pretty decent age gap, but they become such good friends, and they have such a close relationship, and they have such a beautiful friendship. And eventually he finds out the secret that the family is werewolves, shifters. It's part of the book. It's a paranormal romance. And when the son is about like 17, 18 and Ox is in like his early to mid 20s, they start to have a romance. The writing in this is so good. And again, this just ripped my heart out. Like it like I'm actually mad about it because there's just so many parts of this book that were like unnecessarily emotionally distressing. I was emotionally distressed because I was like, you really built this up. You built our friendship up for years. You gave him a found family, and then now you're going to do this to me, TJ Klune. Like, you're gonna do that. It really hurt me. Like, I don't know how to express to you how much this book hurt me, but it then put me back together, and I just... Okay, so my #1 book of the year, you probably know, I read this back in January. It's the second book I read all year, and that is Pretty Girls by Karin Slaughter. I love this book so much that I think about it every single day of my life. Like, I'm not joking. I think about it every single day. In this book, we follow two characters, Claire and Lydia. Claire, she married a rich man, and she sees him die right in front of her in a mugging. And so she kind of reunites with her sister over this, and they get back into connection after her husband dies, because Lydia did not like her husband at all. Her husband was hiding some really intense secrets. They're also tied to this is that they had a sister who disappeared hella long ago, their oldest sister, when they were like kids. Like, she was probably like 18, 19, and they were even younger than her. And now they're like 30s, 40s. So they had a sister who disappeared a long time ago, and so we are also diving into that. And this is every trigger warning in the book. This book is so graphic. I think Wolfsong and this book are like my top 2 books because they got such a reaction out of me. Wolfsong emotionally distressed me to a point of being non-functional, while this one was so vile, horrific, disgusting that I was actually sick to my stomach. Like, people talk about like The Troop or whatever, and The Troop did nothing for me. Like, sure, it was good, but like, I felt fine. Like, it did not, I was literally okay. But this book, I was horrified. And the reason I was horrified, because this is humans being disgusting, humans being awful. And please, if you have any trigger warning, I would really be careful going into this book. Look them up. You can ask me for some of them. If you have a specific trigger, you can ask me and I can tell you if it's in this book, because I love this book so much and I want people to read it. But it is very, very triggering, and people need to be careful going into this book. But that's why I loved it, because it was just so triggering and vile. Like, I loved it. I loved being triggered. I'm gonna be honest, I loved being triggered, and the twists and turns that this book took me on, I just needed to know what happened. And then I literally forced Nicole, from Who Picked This Book, to read this book right after I read it, because I was like, you need to know what I just went through, and I needed someone to talk about it with it, because this book is just, it's so good. Okay, I'm done. So that's all my favorites of the year. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know if you loved any of these books as well. If you hated any of them, you're gonna break my heart, so don't tell me. But what are your guys' favorites? Let me know down below. But again, that's all that I have for this video today, and I will see you guys in my next one. Bye, everybody.
Trying to look like you winning. I'm writing rhymes in the kitchen, soaking in moments we live in. Yeah, you got the nerve to be on me, faking your life for the IG.